Some graphics cards are more common than others, but there are also graphics cards that are so common that you can essentially receive them as a free gift for buying other stuff. Such is the case with this, the ATi Radeon i250. Before I talk about this card, let me explain how I got a hold of it. Last year, in a beautiful summer day, I was doing one of my favorite seasonal activities, going to the flea market. While it is a pretty filthy place that makes you feel like you're at the Mos Eisley Cantina sometimes, you can find some really good deals on old shit. You may remember the Pentium 4 shit box from my Extreme Graphics 2 video. The motherboard, CPU and RAM were bought from the flea market for only €3, a really good price for these components. The seller also had this card for sale, but when I held it in my hands, he went, "If you bought the kit, you can have this card as well." So technically speaking, I got this graphics card for no charge, but the thing is, I didn't really have anything I could do with it. That was because I already had a more powerful AGP card I could use for Windows 98 or early XP stuff. However, in the making of my EG2 video, I decided to include this card as a comparison due to it being from the same time. Since then, I've been meaning to do a full video on this card, so here it is. The Radeon i250 was released on March 1st, 2004, and was a refresh of the 9200. But for some godforsaken reason, ATi had to release two different versions of the card, a beefcake 128-bit memory bus version and a peasant 64-bit one, which was as much as 62% slower, though was a bit cheaper back in the day. Otherwise, there wasn't a very clear indication as to whether or not the card was 64-bit or 128-bit, but if you're buying an i250 nowadays, I can give you a tip. If the card only has 4 memory chips on them, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, it's the losery 64-bit variant. If it has 8 chips, 4 in the front, 4 in the back, then congrats, you have an advantage. Also, if you are buying a 256MB version, all of them come with 128-bit bus. Sadly, the card I have in my possession is this little red Asus model, which is 64-bit. Also, holy shit, I have so many Asus cards in my collection. I/O wise, you have VGA, Composite, which is pretty awesome, and DVI, so basically the basics. Other specs include 128MB of DDR VRAM, 240MHz core clock, 200MHz memory clock, 4 pixel shaders, 1 vertex shader, 4 TMUs, 4 ROP, TX 8.1, and OpenGL 1.4 support, and AGP 8X slot. The last drivers made for the card are Catalyst 6.11 for Windows XP. The card also has drivers for Windows 98, and I did use it at some point and it worked alright. But for the sake of testing, we will use XP on the Pentium 4 shitbox with the exact same specs as in the EG2 video. Without further ado, let's see how the gimped Radeon i250 fares in the benchmarks. In 3D Mark 2001 SE, we got a score of 5203. It's fine, I guess. While running the included demo recording in Quake 3, the i250 achieved 102 FPS average. Not bad, but like the GeForce 6150 SE from my last video, would drop frames with heavy effects. A drop in resolution will definitely alleviate this, but as it is, it's still playable. Serious Sam the first encounter ran very well with the normal preset. The Karnak demo is pretty intense, so in normal gameplay you will see the frame rate go in the hundreds. GTA Vice City also ran okay, although in a 4-star chase, expect the game to slow down quite a bit. But if you turn on the frame limiter, it becomes a pretty good experience. Basically, The vast majority of games from the turn of the millennium are still great fits for the handicapped ATi 250. But what about the games from around the card's release date? Unreal Tournament 2004 ran decently on the ATi 250, but only after turning every setting to the lowest. It really doesn't look great, but it is doing it. Also, if anyone knows a better map I can use in my benchmarks, please let me know in the comments. Far Cry really pushed the guts out of the card, as even with the lowest settings, we didn't get 60 FPS. Alas, I feel most people back in the day would have been fine playing like this. In Half-Life 2, we did achieve exactly 60 FPS average, but it won't stick to it for very long. I'd imagine lowering the DirectX version could probably yield a decent improvement, but I didn't have time to test that. Need for Speed Most Wanted had a good enough framerate for it to be enjoyable, but again at the lowest settings it just doesn't look great. Crysis will not launch, as to be expected for a DX 8.1 card. Luckily we have a substitute in the form of Doom 3. This actually surprised me, as I always thought that Doom 3 was a very demanding game for its time. It's still not very ideal, and I'd imagine the framerate will be a bit lower during combat. But credit where credit is due, it is running the game. Editor Fake Tech here. I forgot to mention this in my original script, and you probably didn't notice it, but the game has some graphical glitches with textures freaking out. I'm sure there may be a fix for it, but oh well. Overall, yes, the 64-bit version of the ATi Radeon i250 can play games from its time period. Just expect to lower the settings quite a lot in order to get a half decent experience. It definitely wasn't a graphics card designed for gaming, and while it was pretty cheap, it really only made sense for certain stuff. Some iGPUs like the Enforce 2 or the legendary ATi IXP300, and yes, I do need to test one or the other at some point, can definitely rival it. So really, it was only good as a cheap getaway from really crappy integrated GPUs. But nowadays, if you do find this graphics card in the bin or cereal box or whatever, throw it in your AGP rig and have some early 2000s low-end fun. And then throw it back in the bin after you're done with it. Thanks for reaching the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, you can like and subscribe if you want to. I've also started a Patreon, so if you want to support my content, you can go there. Thanks again.